In the ads that I've been doing for Quince, I've been talking about their 100% Mongolian cashmere sweaters, and I just got my first one, and it feels luxurious. And who doesn't like the good things in life? Quince offers a range of high quality items at prices within reach, like 100% Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50, washable silk tops and dresses, organic cotton sweaters, and 14 karat gold jewelry. The best part, all Quince's items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. And I love that. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Hello, everyone. This is not Chris Christensen. This is Gary Arndt, and this week I'm going to be guest hosting The Amateur Traveler, and I'll be interviewing Chris Christensen of The Amateur Traveler about The Amateur Traveler on this episode of The Amateur Traveler.
One thing we should start with, Gary, is actually getting you to pronounce my name correctly, because that's not my name. My name is Chris Christensen.
We're going to stick with it at this point. There's a decade grandfather clause.
That's probably true.
I get emails if I mispronounce even the slightest thing, even if it's a regional accent type thing. Someone gave me a 3-star review because I pronounced Beijing instead of Beijing. Like it was the smallest thing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm American. I don't know.
I get that feedback too.
So the purpose of this episode that I suggested was you just have been inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame. And I know that a lot of people who listen to a show regularly are always interested in what goes on behind the scenes, the kind of origin story of the podcast. And I thought this would be as good an opportunity as any for you to tell that story to all the people that listen to your show. So why don't we get started at the very beginning? How did you come up with the idea of The Amateur Traveler?
Podcasting started, I don't know if everybody knows this, but podcasting started in September of 2004. That's when the first official podcast came out. So that means an audio program delivered via RSS feed. And I started listening very early on. I started listening in about December of that year because one of the tech TV shows that I was watching, which was Call for Help by Leo Laporte, got canceled, and he said, we're going to do a podcast. And of course, that was my what's a podcast moment, was there in December of 2004.
I remember the exact same thing.
Yeah. So I started listening to podcasts then and really liked it. I really liked the format of this audio that I didn't tune in the middle, like in radio, and that it was more interesting than the things I could find on radio, and that I could do other things while I was listening. So I was a huge podcast fan almost from the beginning. And so very quickly, I want to do my own podcast. But I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought about doing a tech podcast because I'm a nerd, longtime nerd. And it probably would have been a Mac podcast, but Adam Christensen had already started the Maccast, and it's, we don't need 2 Mac shows, which of course is ridiculous because there are many more than that now. And then I thought about doing a faith-based show, in which I actually did start a year later. I started the Bible study podcast, which I've done since 2006. But then we had a bunch of friends over for a Memorial Day picnic in 2005. So end of May in 2005. And all the best stories were travel stories. Okay, I'm going to do a podcast about my travels, which was a stupid idea because I was working a full-time job. And so I was traveling 4 weeks a year and podcasting 48 weeks a year. So it very quickly turned from that original idea into the interview show that it mostly is today. But that's basically how Amateur Traveler got started. It launched pretty much a month later, July 2nd of 2005, with a different logo, and a different format than it is now. But basically the show goes back to then.
What was the format originally?
So a lot of the things that I was listening to at the time had, like we had so Gary and I did This Weekend Travel for 10 years, and we started with news, for instance. And so originally Amateur Traveler started with 3 news stories and then did some segment on travel. Maybe it was learning a language or some story about hotels or whatever. And then it would do some internet resources. Hey, if you like travel, you should know about this website and things like that. And I dropped first of all, that it was just about my travels probably by 6 months in, and then eventually dropped the news and the internet resources because they were just so quickly out of date. I mean, if you listen to the original shows, I would be promoting things like, oh gosh, I mean, what was big when we started? This is pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook. Everything, all the internet resources we were using at the time were different in 2005. So they were very quickly
some GeoCities page about
your GeoCities page. I mean, there was a Amateur Traveler MySpace page, just to put it in context for how long ago this was in podcasting when that started.
Are all of those original episodes still available?
Yeah, they're all on the website.
Does
They're not
anyone
in the
ever listen to them?
feed. Not the first 20 shows. You have to go to the website to find them, but they're all available on the website. I feel like telling you don't go, but they are there.
How well traveled were you before you started the podcast?
Oh, that's embarrassing. I think I counted up recently that when I started the podcast, I had been somewhere between 10 to 12 countries. I had been to North America, Europe.
I think we've met each other in that many countries.
That's true. The second show was recorded from a parking garage in Sydney. So that was the first time I was in Australia. I don't think I had been to Asia, Africa, or South America yet. And I've still not been to Antarctica. More traveled than a lot of my friends, but so less traveled than so many people I have met. Since you and I both know people who've been to every country, it is not that. Now these 74 countries I've been to, 75 countries next week, doesn't seem that impressive either, because we know people who've been to how many UN countries are there? 193?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I had been to Europe largely.
And that's, I think, the story of a lot of people, to be honest, especially if you're an American. You may have been to Canada or Mexico, maybe some places in the Caribbean, and then probably maybe, if you've been anywhere across the ocean, Europe.
Yeah, no, I'd been to it, and I'd been to Canada and Mexico. I'd been probably, by that point, 15 times to Mexico, mostly on volunteer trips at that point. I hadn't been down to more than Tijuana in Mexico, and I'd really been only to Western Canada at that point.
So how long was it in the show? Because you have a very unique theme song for your show. How did that come about?
That had to be a couple years in. If you go back to the very, very old episodes, you can hear Worf from Star Trek used to introduce the show for a while, or it was me with a voice modulation thing, or there were other things that sounded like a flight attendant announcing the introduction of the show and things like that in the first couple of years. But in, I want to say 2007, I joined Mevio, and they were a network founded by Adam Curry, who did the first podcast. So he's the pod father, if you will. And he had a network for a while that was audio and video. And I was invited into that network, and they paid Jeff Smith, who is a musician out of Nashville, to create the Amateur Traveler theme song. And Jeff came up with 2 verses. I rewrote the second verse of the song, but it's basically Jeff's music, and Jeff is the one who sings that song.
And when Mevio collapsed, you just kept the music?
They didn't collapse. I don't even know if they may still be around, but they went all video for a while. which was interesting because a lot of people don't know YouTube right now is really saying podcasts are video. And there's this resurgence in what it means to be a podcast and going back to video. But there were a lot of popular video shows in the early days, and then video largely went away in the sense that you couldn't find a video show in the top 100 podcasts for 15 years or something like that. Even now, if you look at what were the most popular new podcasts in the last year, really none of them were video first. But because of Joe Rogan and some of the ones that are popular on YouTube, video is making a resurgence in podcasting. But they basically dropped all of us who were audio only. And I went at that point, that would have been 2010. And I went to Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, Libsyn.com for hosting.
When you made the shift from talking about your own travels to interviewing people, where did you initially get all your guests from? Or how?
They were friends at first. Yeah, I think the first interview was Bernie Bernstein talking about a cruise going up to Halifax, Nova Scotia, if I'm not mistaken. And Bernie is someone who I worked with at the time. He and I have since worked together at 6 different companies. And so it was people like that. It was people would tell me about their travels and I'd say, hey, you want to come on the show? And then I started getting pitches from people who were listeners of the show. I remember I think one of the best pitches I've ever gotten was relatively early on. It may have been the first year. And it was Chris Willis. I want to say that Willis is the last name, who is or was an attorney in Atlanta, as well as a really good nature photographer. And he pitched me, he said, I don't know if you'd be interested, but I went to Tonga and swam with whales and took underwater pictures and also brought a hydrophone and recorded whale song. Would that be of any interest to you? And so Chris was on the show many times in the early days talking about going with mountain gorillas or going down to Antarctica. Basically once a year at least, I think he was on the show, and his now ex-wife used to say that he picked his vacations based on what would get him back on Amateur Travelers. So it really did start with friends, and then that circle of friends has just extended over the years.
Well, how difficult is it today to get it? Do you still have a lot of people sending you show ideas, or do you have to find them?
Most of the shows are pitched to me. But there are still times where I've run out of shows or I'm running out of shows, and I'll go on to some of the travel blogger Facebook groups or some of the associations that I'm in, like the Society of American Travel Writers or IFTWA, the International Food, Wine, and Travel Writers Association, or some of those groups on Facebook, and say, hey, I'm looking for some new episodes for the show. Occasionally I reach out to someone specifically because there's a destination that I know somebody is an expert in. But so I'll do that periodically, probably 3-4 times a year, put a call out to tell people I'm interested in getting pitched.
So for people that are listening to this, regular listeners of the show, what are you looking for in a pitch and for other episodes? I'm guessing you don't really care about, we took a Carnival cruise to the Bahamas.
I don't care as much about a Carnival cruise to the Bahamas, I'd have to say. So, I mean, we're looking for a 1-week itinerary. One of the things that's tough, and you, for instance, have been on the show talking about some of the Caribbean islands, and it's tough to do a show about just a beach vacation because, for instance, if you went to what's the Sandals Resort, for instance, or Club Med or something like that, they're intentionally made to be the same no matter where they are. And a lot of those kind of vacations really don't work well in terms of making an interesting show because there's no sense of place. And so usually what I tell people is I'm looking for the hook of the why you should go. And there's some that I wrestle with. There are some episodes that I've got one right now that I'm not sure if I'm going to release or not because I'm trying to figure out, is there enough there in terms of as a destination to warrant doing it as an episode show. So if people are interested in pitching, at the bottom of every page on Amateur Traveler is guidelines on what I'm looking for. But basically, anyone who listens knows that I'm looking for a 1-week itinerary somewhere worth traveling to in the world for a North American traveler. So not looking for a regional destination. Hey, we all like going to the Jersey Shore because we live in New Jersey. It's the what would make me fly cross country to New Jersey and do the Jersey Shore. It's that sort of thing is the pitch that I'm looking for.
You've done a lot of episodes at this point. I don't know what's the number now. It's
932 will come out on Saturday.
You've obviously done some destinations more than once.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll continue.
What's the time period you're looking at before you would do another one on the same topic?
It depends on the destination and how much it changes. For instance, it's harder to do another episode if the destination is the same as all the places we would have recommended last time. If you're telling people you should go to Paris and you should go to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, I've already got an episode that says that. And so part of it is, do you have a different recommendation that's different from the last time we did it? So for instance, the last 2 episodes we did on Tokyo, very popular destination, one of the most popular destinations on the show. Enjoyed doing shows on it, but the 2 episodes were very different. The second one, for instance, had more of a manga feel to it. And where can you see the Godzilla peeking over the building in Tokyo and things like that. And it made it easier to do that episode. It wouldn't be the episode for everybody. If that's not the episode for you, go back to the previous one, which was more about how can you watch sumo wrestlers in their practices and things like that. So a different type of experience. So that's one thing I'm looking for. And then sometimes it's weird. So this week I'm recording 2 episodes on Germany back to back. And I wouldn't normally do that, but I got 2 different pitches that were both good pitches. And sometimes it will line up that way. But so there's no hard and fast rule. I would say 5 years is pretty typical, where I tell people I've covered that within the last 5 years. I don't need to do that again. But it depends a bit on how much there is to do in the destination. I mean, there's more to do in New York and London than there is in Raleigh, North Carolina, for instance. I don't know about you, but I work hard for the money that I have and don't want to just give it away. But that seems to be what the big wireless carriers like. They like keeping my money. If you're tired of years of overpaying for wireless, go from crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks that actually cost more in the long run. Switch to Mint Mobile. Say goodbye to overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode of Amateur Traveler is sponsored by BetterHelp. When you need advice or you just feel stuck, who is it that you talk to? And do they provide answers, or sometimes do they just provide the right questions to help you think about the problem? In a society that focuses on self-reliance, it's easy to forget that sometimes we just need to talk about something with someone else. Even when I was a computer programmer, we often found that just sitting down with somebody explaining the technical problem we were dealing with got easier because the act of explaining it sometimes meant we got the answer, even if we didn't get it from the person we were talking to. Therapy can be a source of support for any area of your life. It's time to shift the focus from doing it all to knowing that we're better when we ask for help. Therapy can help you learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and empower you to be the best version of yourself. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. Access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. Easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/traveler today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/traveler. And thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
What is the most obscure destination you've probably done an episode on?
The most obscure, the ones that make me Google, Timor-Leste, which just came out recently, is fairly obscure, but I would say, what are the islands just north of Madagascar? I'm drawing a blank. The island nation.
Comoros?
Comoros. That's definitely one that I didn't know what we were talking about. I had to Google it. And I love it when people pitch me something and I'm like, yep, don't know where we're talking about. Never heard of it.
Is there a country you haven't done an episode on?
Yes. Mostly the countries I haven't done an episode on are in Africa at this point. And then I think near Malaysia, the Sultanate of, drawing a blank here.
Sabah, Sarawak?
No, I've done Sabah and Sarawak, the other one.
Well, it's just Peninsular Malaysia.
No, I've done multiple on Peninsular Malaysia. What am I looking for here? Not Borneo, but Brunei. Sultanate of Brunei. I haven't done one on also.
Oh. I would have thought that would be a relatively easy one. It's not a hard place to visit or anything.
No, just no pitches. And there are places that aren't even that far away, like Haida Gwaii up in northern British Columbia, that I'm interested in, but nobody's pitched me, or the Channel Islands in between Britain and France. They're not hard to get to, but I've never had a good pitch for the Channel Islands.
I've been to all those places.
There you go. Within the last year. Oh, that's the other thing I'm looking for nowadays.
Fortunately, it's been a while since I've been there, but
yeah,
I don't think Haida Gwaii has changed very much.
No, probably not.
You've been doing this while having a full-time job for the majority of the time you've been doing the show, but you've recently retired. How is that changing the show?
The bonus episodes like this are because I have more time now, because I'm not working a full-time job. The last 5 years I was working a full-time job. The 6 before that I was part-time, and it was feast and famine because I was doing contracting. So sometimes I was working for 4 different companies at the same time, and sometimes I was looking for work. And then most of the rest of the time I've had a full-time job. So yeah, it is given me more time for blogging, although that's still harder for me than podcasting. And it is also given me more time to put in and start doing some of the topical episodes that we've been doing intermittently.
Let's talk about what goes into actual production of the show, because I think a lot of people I get a lot of questions about that.
Sure, yeah. And for those who don't know, we talked about Gary. I did a show for 10 years, but Gary has a very popular show now called Everything Everywhere, which is if you are the champion of bar trivia or you really like knowing everything about everything, that's your show. So anyway, production of the show.
So yeah, let's start. How far in advance do you usually record an episode before it's published?
Usually no more than a month. And because I just don't think that far ahead. I just don't plan that far ahead. And sometimes within the week. There are definitely times. This week's episode was recorded 2 days ago and will come out Saturday. So I had really used up all of the different episodes in the can as I was traveling for 3 weeks. And so it just depends.
That's a month better than me, because I usually have a 2-hour window. So once it's recorded, how long does it take you to edit and put together an episode so it's ready for production or ready for release?
It takes a couple hours for the raw editing. So the first thing I do is I bring in the different parts, the interviewee and my audio tracks and bring them into a program called Descript and edit that raw audio. That takes a couple hours. It depends on the guest. So some guests need more editing than other guests. We all have certain disfluencies, and I'm taking out a lot of ums and ahs and you knows and those sorts of things, which just cleans it up and tightens it up, makes better use of the listener's time. And then also some guests have just a lot of pauses that gets awkward, where they may pause for 30 seconds in between things, and that's just a little too long. Don't really do a lot of editing for content unless I have a guest who does a lot of, as I said previously. No, we said that previously. We don't need to do that again. Don't tend to do a lot of editing for content. So anyway, that takes a couple hours. Then you have to do the show notes. That's gotten easier now because I do use AI for that. I will summarize the transcript with AI and then send it off to the guest and say, ChatGPT and I came up with these show notes. What do you think? That was often the thing that I was editing on Friday night before a Saturday show and just hated it. And so that has gotten easier. And then I have to do the graphics. And then, of course, you have to do the blog post about it and put that all together, schedule that, send it out to the patrons. And then when it comes out, then you still aren't done yet, because then you have to promote it on all the different social media platforms, and you have to send the guest an email saying, hey, the show came out and here's a player you can use for your website. And then you contact the tourism board and tell them, by the way, we just promoted your destination, try and stay top of mind. So all in, I'm not really sure now. Maybe it's 6 hours for a show, 8 hours total.
And what sort of gear do you use? Because I notice that you have a proper big boy microphone now after years
of
not having one.
Yeah. So I'm using a Shure something or other microphone now on a microphone boom stand, which I enjoy. So I can be sitting on my futon and recording, or sitting at my desk. It works either place. And yeah, for years when I started, I was just using some microphone I had that was a headset microphone. And it was a Plantronics headset microphone that was portable. And then most of the time for the show, I was using a Blue Yeti of one sort or another. But yeah,
I don't know if you've ever, there's like a whole webpage dedicated to why you should not use a Blue Yeti.
It worked fine.
Now you're retired. You have more time to spend on the show. You're occasionally releasing these.
I have more time to travel. So that takes away from using the show. So last year I retired. I always put it in quotes because I quit the day job at the end of June. So I had half a year, and I still managed to fly 100,000 miles and be away from home 74 days, according to TripIt. And that's not counting local trips. And so that's the thing that now is competing for my time, for all the time that I put in the show or the blog or the Hotel Scoop blog, which I bought a third blog, which is a hotel review site, which I'm also running. So that's where a lot of the time is going now. So I've been gone this year already for 3 weeks, and it's February 7th. That's a fair amount of travel.
That is 3 weeks more than me. Actually, at the end of this month, that marks the 5-year anniversary of me returning from my last international trip. The tables have definitely turned.
Gary is a full-time traveler for 10 years, for those who don't know.
Oh, more than 10 years.
Was it more than 10? Okay.
It was a long time. But do you foresee any changes or additions or anything what you're doing to the show now that you have more time?
The main amateur traveler show, I don't think will undergo, well, there'll be more shows obviously about my travels because I'm traveling more. But other than that, I don't see a lot of changes to the main show. More bonus episodes, as I said, which will give me some flexibility to not change the main show, basically to do additional content rather than take away something that people have gotten used to or enjoyed.
One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, do I see particular episodes or particular topics that get more downloads than others?
Oh, yeah.
Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when I do a show on Comoros or Timor-Leste, I know it will get fewer downloads. If I wanted more downloads, I would just do shows on Paris and London and Tokyo, and I would get more downloads, but that's not the show I want to make. I really do want to be the researcher. I love the emails that I get where I was looking for a podcast about Azerbaijan and you were it. And so that is definitely how some people have discovered the show, is talking about all those places that people don't talk about, that aren't just featured on the cover of the magazines.
It's odd because that's the exact opposite of my experience. I do not see.
Interesting.
It's the same across the board for everything, but I think that's due to the random nature of the show and the fact that I don't think I'm necessarily getting people listening to episodes because they're searching for it.
That's actually raises an interesting thing, that people use the show in two specifically different ways. One is the people who listen to every show, or at least download every show. And there's definitely some who I prefer all your international shows, or I prefer all your domestic shows. I don't do international travel, or I only do international travel. So you run into some of that. But they're the people who are basically looking for other places they may not have heard of. But then the other thing that happens is people saying, okay, now I'm going to that destination. What, even for me, I was just in Dubai. I downloaded the show you and I did on Dubai years and years ago, and the other two shows I had done in the UAE since then, and listened to those and wrote notes for what do I want to do based on the suggestions that were made on the show.
Oh man, that's a show that has to be completely out of date.
It was reasonably out of date.
Yeah, because that's changed a lot.
Yeah, that is definitely a destination that has changed. And so, so I listened to at least 3 Amateur Traveler episodes on that. And that is quite common that people will say, I always listen to your show on that destination before I go. And I'm one of those people who does that. And so what that means is, in any given month, more than half the downloads I get are for older shows. So very interesting, during the pandemic, the number of people who were downloading newer shows really didn't go down. There was the one guy who left the 1-star review and said, we have to face it that because of China, travel is done. 1 star, gone. But most people were basically traveling vicariously through the show because they didn't want to leave their room, and it was helping hopefully in that way. But the downloads total went down a lot because people weren't doing the other. A lot of people weren't traveling. I was definitely one of those who didn't get on a plane until I was vaccinated. Didn't even go back and see my daughter on the East Coast for more than a year. And so the total downloads went down because the second use of that, of now I'm going, what should I do, didn't happen as much during those years.
You should create a completionist club.
Yes, but so Gary has a club for everything everywhere for people who have listened to every episode. I'm not sure I want people to listen to some of those early episodes, but
I've actually considered doing that, redoing some of my very first ones, because I will never run those as reruns because they were so thin in terms of content, and I should probably redo it.
And first, my shows weren't edited too, and so you got the things with Chris. I can hear you breathing on the show. And Gary, what do you think about that? Darth Vader.
You have
doing a podcast.
This well-established travel audio brand. Have you ever thought of expanding into audio guidebooks or walking tours or things like that you could put under the Amateur Traveler brand, either for sale or download?
Before we get into that, we should talk just a little bit about the brand, because if I had anything to do over differently, I would have looked longer for a name for the podcast before I chose Amateur Traveler. I have regretted sometimes having the Amateur Traveler brand, but at this point that ship has sailed.
Why?
So I meant Amateur Traveler in the sense of the Latin form of amateur, which means to do something for the love of it. And people say, are you still an amateur? I still love it. So yes. But people don't interpret it that way. For one thing, people interpret it as this person.
Really? You're saying people don't take a common English word and use the Latin word?
Strangely enough, this might come as a surprise to you. But yeah, most people think this guy's bad at travel. So it isn't necessarily the best brand. But have I thought about, I've done a couple sightseeing tours early on and have thought a little bit about doing tours like that. Rick Steves did some of those, for instance. He did the Guide to the Prado Museum or something like that. I don't know that it's top on my priority list, that I'm necessarily going to get there. In terms of audio guidebooks, I think of the Amateur Traveler in the sense of being an audio guide, but doing a full audio guide, not sure. That's a lot of work.
By the way, you just killed my idea for the Sinister Life podcast for left-handed people. That's now gone.
I used to joke there was a blogger out there whose blog name was Crazy Sexy Fun Traveler. And she started after me. And so that name was clearly available. I could have been the Crazy Sexy Fun Traveler. And it is really disappointing how many people find that hilarious. But
let's talk about tours.
Yeah.
When did you first run your tour for listeners?
2010 was the first Amateur Traveler tour to Egypt, and it was part of a larger tour, a Cosmos bus tour. So it ended up being Ralph Velasco is a travel photographer, and I brought just a small number of people. I think it ended up being 10, 12 people to Egypt along as part of this larger tour, and did some special things on that tour, like lessons of how to use your camera better, and did a couple photo outings where we were in Marsamatra, Egypt, and went down to the marketplace, which nobody else was doing. But then I stopped doing them for a while because then I went to work for TripAdvisor, and they said, yeah, you can't do that. You're in competition with us. So they were threatened, and then brought them back after I left TripAdvisor. And I'm not sure exactly how many years of hiatus there were before I started doing them again, but probably around 2013.
But it seems like the number of tours has picked up lately, or that you're doing more of them now.
I'm doing one a year. There was one year I tried to do two, and I'm still thinking now that I have more time for travel, I may try and do two, although I would probably do the second one a different way. My wife is encouraging me, rather than having people vote on where I go on vacation, which is an odd thing that I've been doing now since 2010, on and off, but to basically get a group of friends together and say, hey, we're going here, and then extend it to the community and say, do you want to come with us? So that we would know the tour was happening and you could join if you wanted to.
A question for you. What 3 words come to mind when you think of the Amateur Traveler? Yeah, this question sucks, doesn't it? Now that you're on the other end of it.
Hey, when I do solo shows, I answer it for myself too. It just seems only fair to go through that. What 3 words? So destination, that is the key to the show. What actually 3 words would be where to next. I really feel like that's the Amateur Traveler implied subtext is where to next.
And where are you going next?
To Cuba. On February 14th, I fly to Miami and then on to Cuba on the 15th with listeners of the show.
Your prediction has finally come true.
Yeah. So people don't know what Gary's talking about. It's not really true. I was predicting for not every year we were doing This Week in Travel, but at least
Almost
3 in a row that travel restrictions to Cuba would ease next year. And it was a perennially wrong prediction, and it has still remains wrong. But one can go. It's just still complicated.
What exemption are you getting around it with for this
We're
trip?
traveling under the people-to-people, which means we can't stay in Cuban hotels, which are owned by the government. We're doing homestays. And we have to journal while we're there. And we have some specific cultural things that we're doing as we're meeting with the people of Cuba. But it sounds like fun. It should be a fun tour. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. And where can people find you online?
amateurtraveler.com.
All right. Chris Christensen, thanks for being a guest on the Amateur Traveler.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Don't miss your window of opportunity. Upgrade your space now during Blinds.com's anniversary sale and save up to 50% site-wide. Our design experts can help schedule a professional measure and installation, plus guidance for DIYers too. With over 25 million windows covered and our 100% satisfaction guarantee, you can count on Blinds.com to deliver results you'll love. Shop Blinds.com's anniversary sale now for up to 50% off site-wide. Save up to 50% site-wide at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
Thanks to Gary for doing this episode. If you didn't like this episode, remember it was Gary's idea. And if you did like it, well, it was still Gary's idea. Also, thanks to the patrons of the show who not only helped talk me into this show, but also support the show financially. If you'd like to have a monthly Zoom call, get the show early and an ad-free version of the show, then go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. New in the Amateur Traveler since the last episode is a write-up of the trip that I did with Amateur Traveler listeners to Cuba. So check that out. 4,000 words on what Americans can do in Cuba. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, like we answered today, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
One more cathedral, I got to sit in one more castle.